Now, from an economics without capitalism, let me explain that. When you look at a textbook, standard textbook of economics, well, at least when I look at one, there is no capitalism in it. There is demand and supply. There is a process leading to equilibrium. The prices and quantities going up and down. There are markets. Capitalism, I never find. I look for it. I've looked for it all my life. It wasn't there. And let me explain why. Even those of you who have not studied economics, you must have seen the diagram of the demand and the supply curve, right? Prices, imagine now, I don't have it on the board, thank God for that. The vertical axis is price, the horizontal axis is quantity, you have demand curve, downward sloping, upward sloping supply curve, and the professor says equilibrium is where they meet. That's where the price at which demand equals supply. Okay, very powerful visual tool, okay? And then the tragedy begins. Because the poor professor has to explain what happens when a situation, how do prices change? They say, if demand increases, if people, for some reason, the tastes of customers change, suddenly they want to buy more for a given price of whatever it is, balloons, right? Then the whole demand curve goes up. And then the price follows up. Hang on a second. That cannot be supported mathematically. Why? Because those demand curves and supply curves are there, all other things being equal. If they are not equal, that is prices of other goods, incomes. Yeah? But if all other things are not, if all other things are not the same, then those demand curves move anyway. So for instance, when you're buying coffee, this is a standard example, okay, and the price of tea changes, or the price of something else, some substitute, then the demand curve changes. But if the demand curve for coffee goes up, and the price goes up, the price of tea will change. The price of tea will change, your demand curve will shift again. So it will be like a cat chasing its tail. So you can't tell a story about the change in prices in real time. So, poor professors, feel for them. They have to tell a story based on hypothetical reasoning. They have to tell you a story. Compare and contrast the two different sentences. Demand goes up and price follows. That involves time. You're not allowed to do it if you want to be correct mathematically. So what do you say? Okay, this is where demand is and this is where price is. Had the demand curve been somewhere else, the price would have been somewhere else. This is this is called comparative statics. This is all we teach students. But it's very difficult to tell them you are not allowed to speak in terms of time. So time does not exist in any of the microeconomics textbooks. In any of the microeconomics textbooks, anybody who speaks of time is wrong. Should be immediately either fired as a professor or failed as a student. Okay? So there is no time. And there is no money. Think about it. If you have a mathematical model of a system of n equations, and you have n+1 or n+2 unknowns, you can't solve it. If you have an economy, let's say, with two goods, machines and corn, to make it simple, then you have a system of two equations, and the unknowns are the two prices. Okay? Sort of manageable, especially if you have 20 equations and 20 unknowns. But to bring money in as a separate entity, you have to add another equation. So you will have n+1 equation, n+1 unknowns and n equations. You can't solve it. So that's why in microeconomics, in general equilibrium theory, money is impossible to add to the model. So there is no real time and there is no money in the economics that students learn. Most of them don't realize it because they talk about prices. They say the price of coffee. But that's not a monetary price. It's a relative price. How many grams of coffee do you get for one tea bag? But that's barter. That's an economy that is non-monetized. So all the economies in the economics textbooks that you get taught not just in this great university, but in every university, doesn't have time in it, doesn't have money in it. Doesn't have debt either. Because if you don't have money, you don't have debt. And if you throw debt into any macroeconomic or microeconomic model, you can't solve it. So you don't have money, you don't have time, you don't have debt, then you don't have interest rates, really. And you have no risk. Because if you have no time, where is the risk if there's no time? There's no unemployment. Unless you introduce it through the back door. Because if you assume that the demand for labor is like the market for labor is like the market for potatoes, yeah? What happens in the market for potatoes? You have excess potatoes, you reduce the price of potatoes, you get rid of them. So why doesn't unemployment, which is excess supply of labor, disappear when the wage falls? Then we have to start blaming things. Because, in reality, unemployment perseveres, especially when the wages fall catastrophically, like in the Great Recession, like in the Great Depression, like in Greece. Since 2010, we had 42% reduction in wages, and unemployment was going up. It doesn't happen in the market for potatoes. You never have a situation where the price of potatoes comes down, and more potatoes are unsold. It doesn't happen. But if you are determined to model labor as if it is potatoes, then you have to say, it's the unions. The unions are resisting the reduction in the price. It doesn't allow the price of labor to fall, the wage to fall sufficiently, so it's the union's fault. And then, of course, the unions employ some other economists who say, no, it's the fault of monopolists. Because if you have monopoly or monopson in the labor market, you don't have a competitive market. So, it's a blaming game. So politics enters into the realm of bad economics. And you have bad politics and bad economics. It's not a good mix. One of the first things that students of economics learn is the ISLM model, the macroeconomic model, the simplest macroeconomic, beautiful diagram which explains the rate of interest, which of course cannot be explained microeconomically. So, you just assume that there is such a thing as a rate of interest. But in order to even do that then, you have to assume that investment equals savings, which is perfectly true in a barter economy. If we have no money, all right, what would the point be for a farmer to set aside corn and not eat it or sell it to be eaten? The only reason why you would want to set corn aside is to use it as seeds for next year's crop. That's investment. So by definition, when you have no money, savings equals investment. But what if you have money? Because there's no reason why you should assume axiomatically that money saved will necessarily be invested. You can just put it under your bed. Or, you can put it in Deutsche Bank. Very bad idea. And then Deutsche Bank can give it to Siemens to buy back their own shares. That's not investment. The price of the share of Siemens goes up because more of them have been purchased, but there's no actual investment, no new machinery, no new jobs, no seeds in the farm. From economics without capitalism. So we have spent the last 100 years in economics developing aesthetically superlative, beautiful models of general equilibrium. I spent my youth studying them in the same way I would go to the Louvre or to the Acropolis Museum in Greece to look at the aesthetic beauty of the artworks. Totally useless from the perspective of understanding capitalism. Because there's no capitalism there. There's no money, there's no time, there's no interest rate. It does not take into account the permanent disequilibrium in the labor market, the permanent disequilibrium between investments. So everything we teach our students is irrelevant regarding capitalism. But, students constantly have to pass exams. They have to learn those models, to recapitulate them, learn them again and again and again. And then, of course, if they ever become professors, they have to teach their own students the same thing, because this is what they know. And because it's mathematically very complicated, the beauty of complicated mathematics is that it creates monopoly power. Because if you understand it and the folks out there don't, the folks out there think, I'm stupid compared to him. He must understand something I don't. And in the end, of course, I understand nothing on the basis of all the complicated mathematical modeling I've learned, because it's relevant to capitalism. It can't explain unemployment. But then, of course, I go on television and say, oh, Professor, what do you think about unemployment? Oh, it's the trade union's fault. It's the employer's fault. It's all rubbish. I mean, I may be right in what I say, but that will be in spite of the fact that I'm an economist, not because I'm an economist.